All right, I think we're all ready to go here today. I only see one applicant back there. Is the rest out in the hall? Yes, sir. All right, we got Mr. Borders back there. So let's call the meeting of the Board of Supervisors back to order. It's 1:05. We're just a little bit late from 1 o'clock, but we've got kind of a long morning here. All right, so we moved the Parks and Rec. We're going to take that up later. For now, we're on item 18, Bravo. This is to appoint 2 members of the Carson City Planning Commission for a 4-year term to expire 2022. Nancy, you got to introduce who we got going on here. We've got 2 open positions, and I think we've got reappointment requests from Chuck Borders and Daniel Salerno. The new application has been submitted by, I think, Mr. Dars and Terry Green Preston. Dave Pearson, I understand, pulled a Did he pull back?
He pulled out.
He pulled out.
He's
Okay.
in Africa, on his way to Africa or something.
Okay,
Pearson.
Lee Pearson. All right, we ready for this board?
All right.
All
This
ready?
is Charles Border.
Huh?
Charles Border.
Charles? I call him Chuck, whatever. Chuck, Charles. Hey, you. Hey, you. Hey, you. Hey, so why do you want to do this again?
Well, I didn't get done the first time.
Good answer.
Ormsby House is still not occupied.
Well, you'll be a permanent employee, you'll be a permanent member then.
No, sir, I have thoroughly enjoyed my my tenure at the Planning Commission, and I would like to continue doing what I'm doing,
Good.
as long as I can keep you all happy enough to keep me there.
Well, you know, I don't know, you know, that's always a challenge in this, we got, but let me just to kick things off here, let me just ask you, since you've been in the I'm going to ask this to everybody, but now that you've been in it for a while, you see any policies or procedures we ought to change, do you think? I mean, other than the ones that you say, I mean.
Well, there's,
Other than the appointment of board members.
well,
I got you.
I'm not going to touch that. All right.
All right.
The last comment I made on the supplemental questions about the master plan is, I think, something that I think we as a board and you as a board and we as a commission need to look at again. Our master plan is really pretty good, but it's been through an up cycle, a down cycle, and an up cycle again. And I think that it's probably appropriate sometime in the near future to look at going through a whole charrette and doing the whole thing and taking a really hard look at it. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying that because times change and things change, and when you get a bunch of people or a hired consultant or whoever we use, however we do it, to look at it, there are going to be some things that we didn't think about 10 years ago that are going to be important in the next 10 years. And so that, to me, is one of the things that I think in the future we need to do. The other thing that I have noticed is that we do a lot of our business in the Planning Commission through special use permits. And it seems like everything we do is a special use permit. And I don't know the solution to that, but it seems like there ought to be a better way to get some of these things either adjudicated or ruled on, or however we do it. And I don't have an answer to it yet, but it just seems like whenever somebody wants to do something, all they ever apply for is some sort of a special use permit. And in some cases, that's looked at as a cash cow for the city. This is not a very big deal, but you want all this money to get the special use permit. I've got to go through the 60-day, 90-day cycle to get it done. And it just, and again, sir, I don't have a solution to that, but it looks like that's something that we need to see if there's a way we can streamline or fix somehow.
This morning, I don't know if you were watching this morning, but we had mini cells, is that what they're called?
Yes, cell towers.
Mini cell towers issues. That's the next thing coming up in this world, for going to 5G, so things like that, you're right, the things, the world's changing a little bit, so I appreciate your input, Chuck, so.
Okay.
All right, who goes next? All right.
Hi, Chuck.
Hello there.
I'm going to ask you about signs.
About what?
Signs.
Signs.
There went my other one. We discussed it, and of course, it'll be going back to the Planning Commission, but just to discuss ideas. But I want your thoughts on feather flags, A-frame sandwich signs, that sort of thing in a community beyond our downtown area and including our downtown area. So your thoughts on that?
And I assume you're also including Skype signs?
You bet.
Okay. In the two communities that I've had experience as a planning official, it's always been an issue, and I've always hated them. I hate the sandwich board signs. I hate the flag signs. I think and I understand why businesses want to do it, because it supposedly attracts attention. But the Arby's guy that flaps in the breeze just really drives me crazy. But the sign ordinance in itself, if you start, that's one of those nose under the tent things. If you start it, you really got to do it comprehensively. And if you're going to do that, then you also need to, I think, look at highway signs. We've seen, and the commission is real reluctant on these big billboards on Interstate 580 to approve them. And every time we do, we try and hammer them down and make them smaller and make them lower. But when we approved the first one, I made a comment. I said, this is the first of many, and we've probably had 3 or 4 since then, and we'll probably have 3 or 4 more after it. And I just think it ruins the look. It ruins the beautiful landscape that we've got out there and the beautiful highway that it's turned into with all these signs that stick up there. So I understand from a business standpoint, and I was a businessman, I need my signage, but I think there's a better way to do it in our community here in Carson City than flags waving in the breeze and sandwich boards and snipe signs.
Hello there.
Mallory's dad.
Yeah. That's great. At least I'm not Mr. Wilson today. So, yeah, that's my life. Generally, I use the same question for planning commission appointments, and
Yeah.
I've asked you this question before, which in that question for the public is, if you have a developer or builder that brings forward a project that meets all of our design parameters, standards, they're not asking for any variances, and there's a room of 50 people protesting the project, how do you handle that? Do you side with the people that are protesting, or do you side with the developer that has complied with everything that we've asked him to comply with? So that's our normal question. So you can answer that one if you want to. I'm not going to make you answer that. My second question is, for the first time in, well, maybe ever, we might have done it once in 95 or 96, over the next few years, we're going to bump up against the maximum number of building permits that are allowed under our growth management ordinance. So I'd like your thoughts on how, as a member of the Planning Commission, you envision the city handling that when projects come in front of the commission. It's unique for us. We haven't had to handle this issue before, so I'm just interested in your perspective.
Well, you're about a week ahead of us because the Planning Commission is going to look at the growth plan next week. And I know that that's going to be an issue there. Let me try and answer that one first, and then I'll go back to the first question that you asked me. But it's going to be a unique problem because, if we keep our building number permits limited according to our growth plan, somewhere along the way, someone is going to have to make the decision of whose project is better than somebody else's. And I see that wrought with all kinds of problems. And I think the answer to that kind of goes back to the first question you asked as my role on the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is not a body that writes law. It's a body that interprets and adjudicates law. And it's my position that I don't have the luxury that the Board of Supervisors does to allow a motion to come into my decision. Of course, I have my own personal feelings, but I think as a commissioner, if a developer has come forward and he's met all the requirements that we've asked him to do, I think we have to consider passing it on to you. Now, if it becomes a moral or an ethical question or whatever other question that the 50 people that are complaining about are there complaining about, then that's your position as the supervisor to make that interpretation. I don't think I get that right. The flip side of that is, if those are the problems that we're having, then we need to do something about our ordinances that we're trying to enforce. goes back to what does our master plan really do? If we're allowing this and we really don't like it, then we need to change something. And it's always better to do it ahead of time instead of retroactively, because then we're reacting, and it doesn't look good. I think the same thing will apply to coming up to the stops and the building permits. I think what's going to happen is that the planning department is going to have to look harder at projects to make sure that they meet all the requirements the first time. Because if you are running up against a stop and the guy in front of you's plans aren't complete, then you're the next guy in line and you're glad for that. But if they are complete, I think we have to just go through the process as they're submitted. I don't know if that answered your question completely, but
No, it does, and I would just add a comment to that, which is, or maybe a suggestion, which is, maybe from this point on, we need to incorporate conversations. When people bring projects forward, we need to incorporate conversation about phasing, which we haven't really had to do in the past, because maybe that's a potential solution, is that we're going to have to require builders or developers to phase projects over an extended period of time to meet the number of permits that are available, and probably meet absorption.
and the reality is that's probably better for the developer anyway, in the long run.
Good afternoon.
How are you today?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Are there any provisions in our special use permit rules that you think can be eliminated or revised to improve our processes?
I don't know that there's anything in the special use permit rules that I would revise. I think the process is what I spoke about earlier of how do you get things approved other than with a special use permit. And, if you start to dissect it, I don't know where you end up. It's a process that we have now that may or may, I guess it's effective. I think it's kind of effective. It just seems cumbersome for some issues. This community doesn't grant variances. I've had experience with granting variances as a planning commissioner for small things, and there was a qualification for it, and it was a more streamlined process. I'm not sure that would work here, but there's got to be some better and more effective ways to streamline the special use permit process. And like I said before, I'm not sure what it is, but I think we need to look at it.
So are you suggesting that maybe some more items could become administrative review, that not everything has to come to the planning commission or a smaller level?
Not necessarily administrative review, because then the commission and the board of supervisors tend to lose a little bit of control. But maybe there's another process. Maybe a special use permit B or something within a range and a scope and an idea that's a whole lot more streamlined as far as being approved. Same things that could go on, for example, a consent agenda. If right off the top of my head, I'm thinking of every 5 years the billboards have to get renewed. All right, if those could all be done with a single form and done on a consent agenda in a meeting, it would be a whole lot more streamlined for everyone than having to sit there and read through them all and look at them again and killed half a dozen trees trying to print up the documents necessary. So something, I don't know that the rules are wrong. My suggestion would be let's look at the procedures, not change the rules.
Hey, Chuck.
How are you, sir?
Oh, sir, thank you. I know I'm older than you, but...
But we checked that out.
We need affordable housing in this community. I think almost every community does. What things do you believe the Planning Commission can do to help deal with that need? Specifically, would you look favorably on the idea of changing an ordinance to allow containers to be made into housing, as someone suggested not long ago? And that's just my first question. I have 24 more.
Okay. I made a comment that I said we need to not be developing ourselves into a community where the people that live and have to work here can't afford to live here. And that's typically becoming a problem with the wage gaps in a lot of communities. There are some different types of housings, some zero lot line developments, some small house developments. There's lots of things out there that I don't think we as a community, I know we as a planning commission have not looked at. We put it on our list of things we'd like to talk about to find ways. Right offhand, I'm not real keen about container houses, but I've there are some smaller houses. Typically, the biggest problem is in the land acquisition costs, not the construction costs, and that tends to drive the cost of the housing, even if it's small, because there is not a lot of affordable land. So the first issue to solve affordable housing is to find affordable land. The second thing is when you get to the federal government and trying to get some of their money, if you actually want it, is then you have to typically find an area that you would like to designate by the city as a blighted area. And I don't know of any city commission that I've ever known that ever wanted to take a big section of their town and label it as blighted. That does cause a lot of consternation amongst the public. If you have a beautiful house and all of a sudden you're in a blighted neighborhood. So the answer to your question is yes, we need to find ways that we can get people into houses they can afford to live in. But it's always a difficult situation. The easiest answer to a builder or developer is make it smaller. But when you make it too small, then it becomes rental property, and then you got landlords that raise the rents, and you're back to where you were, only in a smaller house. So we have to find ways to make affordable housing for people that we think are going to buy them and live in them, not just somebody's going to buy 45 of them and rent them out.
Thank you. Second question is, I was struck earlier today, and I imagine you weren't watching, but we had those small cell tower. We had that issue as something we talked about, and then we had this sign issue, and it got me to thinking about the clash, because we were talking about design standards regarding the cell towers, but as you and I apparently agree, we're not real fans of these signs flapping in the breeze, etc. But I just want to ask a philosophical question about where is your head regarding design standards, generally speaking?
The difficulty with design standards is the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. It's the same thing we have with design standards in the historical district. Now, they're pretty well defined, but there's always somebody that's going to say, I think this is really beautiful, and somebody else says, it meets the design standards, but it looks like hell. So design standards per se should be a range, not a definition. It should be a scope and an idea. And then you've got a committee of 5 or 7 that's going to say, I think that's pretty and I think that's not. That's about the only way you can do it. I don't think you can write down all the design standards and expect that the first one you get is not an exception to the rule.
Thank you.
It's always going to happen.
John, you mind if I follow up on the affordable housing question? How about HUD housing? What do you think about that?
You mean trailers?
No, just HUD apartments, HUD financed or tax leveraged.
Well, the difficulty is in who administers it and who makes sure that it stays where it's supposed to be. HUD housing is an option, but if the city, if we were going to do it, I would say that the city ought to manage it, and in that way, at least you have some control over it. But it's, be careful of the gift horse.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. You want to add anything at the end here? You want to?
No, I appreciate you all and taking the time. I've enjoyed my brief stint on the commission. I would like to continue. I think we have a diverse and vocal board, which is exactly what I think you want. We don't always agree, but because there's 7 of us, we always have a consensus. And then the tough ones end up on you guys' lap, and then you guys can do your magic with it and send it back. I think we try and do the best we can with what we got.
Thanks, Chuck. Okay, all right. That's it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're welcome to sit, you know the drill. You're welcome to sit around and listen.
Thank you.
Hi, Daniel. How you doing today?
I'm fine, sir. How are you?
Doing all right.
Good afternoon. Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. Dan Salerno's my name.
I know, Dan. We know. So, you've been through the drill before. Let me just ask a couple questions to get it going here. One is, why you've been on the board, been on the commission for a while. Why do you want to stay on it?
Well, I really enjoy doing it.
Push the red button and push the,
Can you hear me okay?
yeah, there's a button right there. There you go.
My background has been in architecture and planning, and I'm retired now, and I want to give back to the community where I can, and I think this is probably one of the best ways because I've got more experience doing this sort of thing than anything else.
Since you've been on the board or on the commission, are there any policies or procedures that
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
are there any policies or procedures that you've come across that you think should be changed? Any procedure that we use in the planning process, particularly as between what goes to the planning commission and what goes up here to the board? Any of those procedures that you think should be changed or modified?
There hasn't been much change as far as what I've seen in, past years doing it, if that's what the intent of your question was.
No, is there something that, since you've been on the commission, is there something that has caught your attention that we might want to think about changing in terms of our policies or procedures?
Yes, there is. There's one item that I think needs to be changed. Outdoor living space and indoor private living space in family housing. The code allows us currently to build family housing, without any private space. There's one project that's underway right now that has been approved and under construction, and the units have no private outdoor space. If you have a dog or a cat, if you have kids, some of these are 3 bedrooms, or most of them are 3 bedrooms or more. They've got, yes, the common open space to play in, but I think everybody really needs a yard. So there's one little glitch, I think, in our code that just needs some attention, and we need to address that.
Thanks.
And I'd like to do that.
Okay. You want to start, John?
Sure. Hi, Dan.
Hi, John.
We need affordable housing in this community. What do you believe the Planning Commission can do to help address that need? And I know that's a tough one.
Well, I spent a lot of my career designing and planning affordable housing. When I started my career, I felt that the place an architect could really help the community would be to design housing that is attractive, functional, and affordable. And that's what we did in the San Diego area. That led to other things. We were trying to find ways of doing affordable housing, and a lot of it resorted in using factory-built as we do mobile homes. And it can be done by, in the same fashion where they put the units together. We have to cut down the cost of labor, and that's one of the only ways we can do it, because we're still building houses the way we used to 100 years ago. 2x4s, one stick at a time, we put them up. And we need to stop doing that, at least for affordable housing. We've got to build them so at a lower cost. We did it, we designed it, with some of them, we even used fiberglass to build houses in the San Diego area. Using fiberglass, we were able to design a house and build a house that you couldn't tell. It wasn't that it had stucco like all the other buildings that were built, and it also had what appeared to be a clay tile roof. You drive by, it looked like every other house. There was a big problem, though, and that was it was so difficult to put the components together that it never went anywhere. So we've attempted to do that many times in the past, and I've got quite a bit of experience doing that and working with the city of San Diego. And I think that's something that we need. We need to be able to get affordable land so we can build affordable houses. We need to relax some of the cost of building permits, specifically perhaps only for affordable housing. And in that way, I think that we can do it, and in conjunction with those who build factory-built housing.
Second question, just a general philosophical question. What is your view on design standards from your standpoint?
That we have? I think
Design standards.
Design standards? I think that what we currently have is excellent. I think that the code is great, and I think we have one of the finest planning departments that I've ever worked with.
Good afternoon, Daniel. Hi. Are there any provisions in our special use permit rules that you think should be eliminated or revised to improve our processes?
Just offhand, I can't think of any. I think that normally the way it develops is that it comes to the planning department and we jointly work on it and come up with any changes that should be made. But I can't think of anything specific.
Hello, Daniel.
Hey, Brad.
My question for you is, over the next few years, Carson City will either approach or exceed the total number of building permits that are allowed under our growth management ordinance. I'd like to get your perspective on how going forward the Planning Commission should be looking at this issue and any thoughts on any potential solutions for that.
Well, I think that we have to perhaps do more zoning for residential. Perhaps we've got more commercial property, industrial property than we currently have, or than currently what we need. we've got a limited amount of space in Carson City, and we have to use it in accordance with the best needs, the best requirements that we must have. And I know that we've recently looked at some property in the east side of Carson, and I think the decision has been made to use that for affordable housing, and I think that was a wise move. And the other thing is, the only other way we can do it is go vertical. We have to build housing, higher when we really run out. But I don't think we've approached that here in Carson City at this point in time.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi.
Coming before the Planning Commission soon will be something that we discussed today, which is feather flags, sandwich signs, and this even extends into billboards. I want your thoughts on those types of things for businesses and perhaps how we should alter our ordinance to deal with that.
Well, I think that we've got a good plan for billboards, et cetera, now, and I think that it's appropriate that with certain types of businesses, they should be tighter restrictions on the size of billboards. I think that having larger billboards that are any kind of billboard obstructs the environment. It really does. So I think we need to minimize it as much as we possibly can.
Now, what about feather flags and sandwich signs that businesses want to?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part of that.
Feather flags and sandwich signs that businesses want to be able to display.
Oh. Well, I think perhaps we ought to have an ordinance on it. There isn't one currently that I'm aware of, and we need to look at it.
Daniel, anything you want to add at the end? Any concluding comments you want to make?
No, I think that I've made some in my paperwork that we've submitted to you. I think that would pretty well cover my questions.
Very good. All right. All right. Thanks. You're welcome to hang out and see what we do here. Thanks, Daniel, and thanks for your service on the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Howdy. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Are you Alex?
I am.
How are you doing today?
Quite well, sir. How are you?
Quite well. That's good. Doing all right here. Have you been through this process before with us?
I have not.
Well, here's kind of just a little bit of a synopsis. We always have, we've got, let's see, we've got 2 positions to fill. We've got 4 people. We always ask the same questions of each individual applicant so that nobody gets a leg up. And then we make a decision, and you're entitled to wait around in the hearing room here when we make the final decision. So that's what the questions you're going to get from us today are the same that we asked the other 2 applicants so far, okay?
Yes, sir.
So let me ask you, what I know you've written about it, but let me talk to us a little bit about what piqued your interest to be on the Planning Commission?
Well, first and foremost, I want to make a difference in my community. I've lived in Carson City, I think going on 20 years, 15, 20 years, something like that. And there's a lot of things that I'm very happy with that are done and how they're done in this area. And then there's some other things that I'd like to see change in. I saw the article in the Nevada Appeal, and I figured this was my opportunity. And given that I have a extensive history in the building industry, I thought this would be a pretty nice fit for me.
How long have you been in the building industry?
I started when I was, it's been about 15 years.
Okay. All right, let me ask you, are there any particular provisions or policies you've seen either out of the Planning Commission or out of the Board of Supervisors that you would believe should be changed to make the process more smooth, or just changed in any way that would facilitate your type of business?
I don't know about, I guess one of the policies I'd like to see changed a little, and not much, is in the master plan. It's talking about focusing on developing areas that are underdeveloped within the city right now, and target areas, and a concise pattern of development. And the other third option on the master plan that we're not focusing on is a little bit of expanse. While I don't think expanse is necessarily great, because as I put in all my applications, I think public lands are very important. I think that we should not write that off, especially given the landscape of the current economy. I think we should focus on all three styles of building that are mentioned in the master plan. I don't know if that really qualifies as changing a policy, so to speak, but it's something that I would like to see done a little differently.
Okay, all right. Brad, you want to start this time? Sure.
Hello, Alex.
Hi, Brett, how are you?
Good. My question for you is, over the next few years, Carson City is going to either approach or exceed the allowable number of building permits requested that are allowed under our growth management ordinance. This is something that we haven't experienced in the past. So what I'd like to get is your perspective and your thoughts on how, going forward, the Planning Commission should deal with this issue and any potential solutions you might have.
Excuse me. I think that on the forefront of anything we should be looking at is water. Either water supply or hydrology studies to show, flooding, anticipation, all of that sort of stuff. Especially with that, 100-year storm we all lived through a couple years ago, I think it really showed the importance of, in certain developed areas around northern Nevada, what can happen when we build irresponsibly. So I think that should be something we should look at, is the responsibility, regardless of numbers of permits issued, how we're doing it. I have no problem exceeding the number of allowable permits, as long as it's done responsibly. I think that builders and developers especially, not just a general contractor building on one parcel, but a land developer should be 100% responsible for that sort of study. And I know the city looks into that as well, and we should do our due diligence to make sure that we're really looking into it. I think we should match our permit allocations and permit granting with the level of need, supply and demand. And if it's being done responsibly, I don't see any problem with exceeding the maximum number of allowable permits. Does that answer the question?
There's no right or wrong answer.
Okay.
Just wanted your thoughts.
Sorry.
Good afternoon.
Ms.
Thank you
Bagwell?
so much for applying.
Thank you.
Are there any provisions in our special use permit rules that you think could be eliminated or revised to improve our processes?
I got to say, I'm not familiar enough to talk about revisions on that. I would be guessing, and it would be pretty reckless, so I'm not comfortable. I'm sorry.
Alex, we all know that we need affordable housing in this community and in many others. What things do you believe the Planning Commission can do to help deal with that need? Specifically, for example, we had a recent fellow who came in and talked about converting containers to housing. What ideas might you have that you could bring to the Planning Commission, or how do you see that as a possibility? Or is the Planning Commission in that business?
I don't know that the Planning Commission necessarily is in that business, but I think that everyone at that level of government should bear a little responsibility in that matter. But I don't know that that is the Planning Commission's necessarily their responsibility. That being said, I think that we should make sure that we are permitting for building in affordable areas where land is affordable. land price along with, contracting prices obviously drive the end price of the housing. If we're only granting permits for areas where the land is not necessarily inexpensive, then the end result is not going to be affordable housing. It's going to drive the pricing up. So I think Carson City does a pretty good job of it, to be honest, but I do think that there's always room for improvement, and I think the baseline of where the Planning Commission steps in is making sure that we are approving permits or even zoning changes, if necessary, to make affordable land available for affordable housing.
Second question is more of a please wax eloquent philosophically about your view of design standards.
I believe that government should be, of all levels, government, state, local, all of it should be as hands-off as possible in every aspect, but especially in design standards. I know I don't find a flaw in what we have currently with design standards. I don't know that we need to be more involved or up the standards, lower the standards. I think as technology or studies come about or technology improves, things like requiring, I do doors and windows, things like requiring the WUI fire code on windows, helping to fireproof a home. I think that's a great example of increasing our design standards or requiring more from design standards, barring safety and general public safety as well as individual safety. I'm not sure that we need to step in more than we already are. Thank you.
Hi, Alex.
Ms. Abad.
Coming before the Planning Commission is something that we discussed today, and that is signs, feather flags, A-frame signs,
Sure.
even billboards. All of this is going to come before the Planning Commission to see if we need to fine-tune our ordinance or not, or what. I want to know your thoughts with regards to, businesses having feather flags and sandwich signs out in the sidewalk area and out near streets and so forth.
First of all, I don't think that one of the things I spoke about or wrote about in my application stuff was public walkways and open air space. I think any sign that's impeding be a sidewalk, a trail, whatever, I don't think that should be allowable. Beyond that, I think that people should be encouraged to advertise their business. So there obviously needs to be a standard. We don't want, what's an eloquent way of putting this? We don't want Tijuana.
You could be blunt.
There you go. I'll let you say it, sir. We don't want Tijuana out there. But, I think that a standard of what defines permanent, what defines temporary, what temporary standards mean as far as do we have to pull it in at night, do we put it out in the morning, I think setting all that up in a very clear and concise way, while still, just like with the building standards, I don't think government should be involved in every single decision. So I think that the people should be free to advertise their business without impeding on other folks and without Tijuana-ing up the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Done? Okay. Done? Alex, anything you want to add? Anything you've written? We've all read all that. Anything you want to add?
I just appreciate the opportunity. Honestly, I'm always, like I said, I want to get involved, and I really appreciate being here.
Well, thanks for applying, and thanks for being a good citizen of Carson City. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
We'll listen, have one more applicant, I believe, and then we'll make the solemn decision. Okay? As Brad said, there are no right or wrong answers. Just try to get a feel. Okay?
All right. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Terry.
Thank you.
Terry, how you doing?
I am doing well, thank you. How are you?
Good.
So I should say, good afternoon, Mayor and Supervisors.
Yeah, it's a good. Yeah, is it raining out there yet?
No.
No?
No, I thought it was, but it was the HVAC. So,
Okay. Jerry, you've been through. Have you been through this process?
yes, I have.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Well, let me ask you then, just to start start a little dialogue with us here. What piqued your interest about serving on the Planning Commission?
What I think is that I have been in building forever. I'm a third-generation general contractor. My dad was a builder here in Carson City. My big claim to fame is by the time I was 18 years old, I lived in 56 houses in Carson City. Now I've been back. I was gone for nearly 20 years, and now I've lived in 61 homes in Carson City. So,
Bill, how many homes, your family, between you build a lot of homes and a lot of buildings in Carson City?
tons, absolutely tons. In fact, I was listening to your discussion on the Bella Largo thing and the numbers, and I remember sitting on the floor with numbers, and I did want to let you know is the way that it was actually determined how the floors were and how the buildings were done was by the post office. So blame them. So.
Yeah, next time we do that, we ought to get the post office in here. Yeah. So, Terry, you've been in the building community for a long time and back here. Any policies or procedures you know about or that you think should be changed in Carson City with respect to planning and zoning and how it interrelates with the Planning Commission and with the Board of Supervisors?
I think my biggest concern is one of the things that I was most impressed about is that I think the idea of the open space and the purchasing of development rights was, this city actually had so much foresight on that. That was absolutely amazing to me. However, when you buy up development rights, you need to be able to bring that back as far as inventory into the area. And where we're surrounded by all of the different other governmental agencies and limited, the other day I spent some time actually looking for multifamily housing and where it could actually be put, and there is very little of it. So I think that maybe it might be a time to kind of look at this again and see where we could go.
Pretty good. All right, let's see. Lori, you want to start, and then we'll go that way.
Good afternoon, Terry.
Hi, Lori.
So are there any provisions in our special use permit rules that you think can be eliminated or revised to improve our processes?
Well, I think the one thing is with the special use permits is that I also had I have spent a lot of time with your special use permits because with the state of Nevada, I was in charge of their special use permits. And so we had a lot of things that we would work together. I think sometimes with the special use permits that people will make an application to them and you have no idea what the actual scope is until it happens. A good example is several years ago back with Walt Sullivan. I called him up and I said, are you aware that they're going to shut down Stewart Street? They're going to shut down Roop Street and they're going to put, parade floats in Mills Park? And he says, what? And I said, look at your special use permit. We called an emergency meeting of all the city, the fire, the police department and so forth because we had no idea that that was the scope of a proposed special use permit, and all they asked us for was the use of the city parking lots. The state parking lot. So yeah, I think a little bit more in depth on what is being proposed.
Carson City and other communities need affordable housing. What can be done from the Planning Commission level to help address that need in Carson City, if anything?
I think one thing is infilling, the ability to bring in people that, let me backtrack. I think that a lot of the affordable housing that was put in here is still here that my family built almost 30 years ago. And when we built that 30 years ago, one of our feelings is that we took the income of the people that actually were working in Carson City. And at that time, it was 4 times the amount of the income for a rent. Right now, a very sad situation happened yesterday where there was a fire. And I'm actually affiliated with one of the property management firms that actually handles that. I found it very disheartening that I made phone calls yesterday afternoon to 6 different property management firms, and there was no place to locate these people in places that were under $1,100 a month, between $700 and $1,100 a month. That was frightening to me. I think that we should encourage developers to come in here and actually look at low-income housing, look at cluster homes, and give some people the ability to hopefully purchase. I know when we built Spark Parks Terrace, one of the things was that is we actually had subsidized housing came in through the rural housing. And that way people that were state employees, firemen, teachers, they were able to afford houses, which they had previously not been able to do.
Second question, just wax eloquent for me, if you would, on your philosophical view of design standards.
Design standards can either enhance a project or kill a project. As a contractor in Washington State, I had a piece of property that should have been able to have 12 units on it. The Planning Commission came in and said, we want front porches on it, we want a neighborhood look to it, we want to have it look kind of Cape Cod-y, and we do not want to have a two-car garage take over one half of the front of this. My development ended up being 6 lots. So I lost the ability to be able to do that because of the way it was structured. I still had to bring in roads. I had to put in a hammerhead for a fire department truck to be able to turn around in an area. And it was a project that it really hurt it. It really did. But at the same point is that I look at homes here in Carson and I see that we don't have a lot of things that we've had as far as design elements that I used up in Washington, like zero lot lines, cluster homes, and some of these other different things. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Hi, Terry.
Hi, Karen.
We discussed today, and we'll be coming before the Planning Commission, the subject matter of signs, specifically feather flags, A-frame sandwich signs. It even extends to billboards. And the discussion will be, do we revise our ordinance? What do we do? I want your thoughts on that.
Well, I remember years ago we actually had a sign ordinance in Carson City that said, given the face of the building, you can have X amount of square footage for a sign. They also gave on some different projects you had the ability to put in monument signs. That has obviously gone by the wayside. When I drive around certain parts of town and I see banners, that have been up there for a long time, and they all have tears and rents, and they look horrible. I see feather signs out, and some of them are actually in their frame. Some of them are not. We have wind here. The A-frame signs fall down. You know, I look at all of that stuff and I think, what a mess, actually. I think that it needs to be addressed. I really do. I think it needs to be addressed. I think that it needs there where people, most developments, as far as like commercial developments, will decide on their sign ordinances when they build, whether or not they're going to use cut letter signs, or whether or not they're going to use a pylon monument sign, or if they're going to have a lens in the front. But there has to be some kind of continuity. You're welcome.
Terry,
Hey, Brad.
my question for you is, over the next few years, Carson City will be approaching and potentially exceeding the number of requested building permits than are allowed under our growth management ordinance. And this is not an issue that we've experienced before. So give me your perspective on what the Planning Commission could or should be doing going forward to address this issue, and any potential solutions that you might have.
Okay. First of all, I'm going to disagree with you. There has been a problem with the growth management before, because I actually spent the night out here in a motorhome waiting for building lottery back in the 70s, because we did not have the water. We did not have, we didn't have access to Marlette. We did not have all of the water that was actually brought in by the Walkers and this and that over the years. I mean, you guys have made huge inroads on this. But there is a point when you can only bring in so many housing starts in a year. You have got schools, you've got fire department, you've got police department, you've got all of these different things that have to work together. And if you have too many building permits at one time, and I have to tell you, I really don't see that many building starts. And I'm going to put this back on my own opinion, is that right now most of our lumber supplies are coming from out of the country. It's expensive. And a lot of the building supplies are going to places like Santa Rosa, Houston, places like that. So building costs have actually been escalating. If we have a developer that has the wherewithal to actually do the building and so forth, I think they're going to be doing a little bit more graduated too, just because of the availability of the building materials. So it might not be something that we have to address right there. You're welcome.
Terry, is there anything you want to add? Any concluding comments, anything about anything that was raised today, anything you want to talk about?
No, I would just like to say that it was really funny because, I was brought to this town before I could actually walk. And I look at Carson City, and when I look at it, I look at Stewart Street used to be dirt. And most of these places didn't even exist. And when we start talking about growing from 3,500 people to what we have now, when we talk about when I was a little kid, I remember my dad actually was one of the people that started the building. They put together a group, him and Garth and Jack Childs and Millard and this, in order to put in actually have building codes. There was a Mexican restaurant just down where the legislature is that had a mattress that separated the kitchen from the dining room. So, this to me it's a good thing. It is really a good thing, and I'm really pleased to see that we have the water, because otherwise, what was happening to us in the 70s, Carson City wouldn't be here. So, thank you.
Thanks, Terry, and thanks for applying, and
No problem.
thanks for your family. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, board. As usual, is another one of these real Solomon decisions. So, anybody want to start? Or you want me?
Start.
Go ahead if you want. That's fine. Or you could throw me under the bus. I'd start too. I don't mind.
I don't want to throw you under the bus. First of all, I want to thank everyone for applying. I really appreciate that. And I do a scoring system, and so it strictly comes down to the numbers. So on my scoring system, I have to rank Chuck and Alex as the ones that came out on top. So that's where my vote's going to be.
My scoring system came out about the same way, so go ahead.
It makes it hard, because I put Chuck as number one, and I have Alex and Terry tied. Because I think they both bring, 1 point? Oh, yeah, I'm like, wow. I thought they both brought such diverse, different perspective, and so it really comes down to what I think can balance out the Planning Commission as a whole. So I got to think about that, but I really like Chuck.
So we always pass for a minute?
I'm gonna go with Chuck and Terry, although they were all good, but Chuck and Terry were my choices.
We'll give Lori a second to think and make a choice.
I know. I really think that I'm going to go with Terry too, because I thought I'm looking for the balance of all activities and who sits on the current Planning Commission and who fits in to give it the pro side, the con side, and so that I think things will be well vetted before they come to us. So I guess that's part of she has a lot of experience with the state in the Buildings and Grounds arena, and I think maybe has a background that would be helpful, while Alex had some building background, but I don't know, tough one. It's close.
Yeah, actually, I think both Terry and Alex have, for me, building backgrounds. I think, and I think it's not a bad idea to have a builder on the Planning Commission. Alex has kind of a, a niche building, windows and doors and things like that. I think that's a valuable thing to have from somebody who's, in that capacity in the building environment. But I think, it's important that we have somebody like that on the board, so.
Tough one.
All right, so we have four votes for Charlie, and 2 for Terry, and 2 for Alex.
Yeah, so.
I thought it was going to be irrelevant here.
You're not.
You were waiting for that, weren't you?
So I
You
can
know
make
them all.
this, I can make this really fun and say that I'm going to go for Terry and Alex. No,
Well, we know where you're going to go then.
no. According to my scoring system, and I do the same as Karen, I score it, so I just go by the numbers. I have Charles number 1, and I have Terry just edged out Alex.
Take a motion to appoint
Okay.
Terry and Chuck as to the planning commission.
Okay. I move to appoint Charles Chuck Borders and Terry Green Preston to the Carson City Planning Commission, each for a 4-year term that's set to expire January 2022.
Second. Motion second on the motion. All in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's it. Congratulations. Go do well. All right. All right, we're now on concluding public comment.
And then
Thank you, guys. Okay, Alex, come back.
Yes.
I was just going to laugh and say, I'll get my first appointment, and Alice is looking pretty good.
All right.
Right?
Anybody on concluding public comment? Board, anything we missed up today? All right, unless there's an objection, we're adjourned.